I walked into the mediator's office on a Thursday morning in February carrying a single canvas tote bag and the particular kind of calm that only comes after you've rehearsed for something so many times it stops feeling real. The building was on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Charlotte. The kind of office where the furniture is expensive enough to make you feel like arguing would be inappropriate. I signed in at the front desk, poured myself a cup of water I didn't drink, and sat down in a chair near the window that looked out over a city I had not lived in for 6 years. My aunt arrived 11 minutes later with her attorney. I had not seen her in person since my grandmother's funeral. She looked essentially the same. Pressed blazer. Hair set in the way she always kept it, severe and deliberate. Her attorney was a man named Kenneth Work, who introduced himself with the handshake of someone who wants you to know immediately that he is the most important person in whatever room he has just entered. My grandmother's name was Vera. She had lived alone in the same house in Mecklenburg County for 31 years, raised 2 daughters in it, outlived one husband, and spent the last decade of her life tending a garden along the east side of the house that produced more tomatoes than any one woman could reasonably use. She used to mail them to me packed in newspaper inside flat-rate boxes. I would find them on my apartment steps in Portland, slightly warm from the journey, with a note card tucked inside that said things like, "Don't let anyone make you small or call me when you get this." She passed in October. She was 81. Her heart simply stopped one evening while she was reading in the back room, and her neighbor found her the next morning when she didn't come to the door for their standing Thursday coffee. I found out from her attorney, a woman named Miss Lance Aldridge, who had handled my grandmother's affairs for the better part of a decade. Miss Aldridge told me that my grandmother had updated her will 14 months before she died, and that the update was specific and deliberate and witnessed by 2 people who were not family. The house on Birchfield Lane, along with a savings account my grandmother had maintained quietly for years, was left to me. My aunt found out within the week. She called me from a number I recognized and left 3 voicemails in the span of 2 hours. The first was measured. The second was less so. The third used the word ungrateful 4 times and suggested that my grandmother had clearly not been thinking clearly in her final year, which I found remarkable given that my grandmother had been sharp enough 3 months before she died to beat me at Scrabble by 47 points, and then explain exactly why I had miscalculated my tile placement. I did not call back. 6 weeks later, I received a formal dispute filing. My aunt was contesting the will on the grounds that she had been the primary caregiver during my grandmother's final years, that she had contributed financially to the upkeep of the property, and that the bequest to me represented a deviation from what my grandmother had always intended. I drove from Portland to Charlotte in 2 days. I let myself into the house on Birchfield Lane with the key my grandmother had sent me 2 Christmases earlier, tucked inside a card that said, "Only this belongs to you." I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. I sat on the back steps and looked at the garden, bare in February, and spent a long time trying to understand what I was walking into. The mediation had been my idea. I had suggested it to Ms. Aldridge as an alternative to a full probate dispute, partly because I believed it might actually work, and partly because I was 32 years old and had no interest in spending the next 2 years in litigation over a house I already legally owned. My aunt agreed, which I had not entirely expected. Kenneth Rourke, I suspected, had advised her that the will was solid and that mediation was her best realistic option. The mediator's name was Howard Finch. He had the unhurried manner of a man who had seen every version of every family argument and had stopped being surprised by any of them sometime around 2009. He laid out the ground rules, confirmed that both parties understood the process, and then asked my aunt's attorney to begin. Rourke went first, and he was organized about it. My aunt had visited my grandmother every week for 4 years. She had driven her to medical appointments, coordinated with her doctors, managed the scheduling of her prescriptions, arranged for the repair of the roof after the storm 2 winters ago. She had been present. She had been consistent. She had done the visible work of caring for an aging parent. I, by contrast, had been in Portland. I had not attended the last 2 Thanksgivings. I had not come home when my grandmother had a minor procedure the previous spring. I had not been there. The picture he built was careful and not entirely inaccurate. I had been far away. I had missed things. I knew it. Then my aunt asked to speak directly. She had prepared. I could tell by the way she sat forward slightly when Finch nodded at her, the way her voice started at exactly the register of someone who has practiced being reasonable. She talked about the years she had spent in that house, about the Sunday dinners, about driving to appointments in the rain, about what it cost emotionally to watch someone you love decline. And then something shifted in her. Some door she had been holding closed came open. She looked at me and said that I had always been my grandmother's favorite, that I had exploited that I had stayed away for years and done nothing and still managed to be the one who walked away with everything. She said that I had coasted on being loved without earning it, that I had never been serious about anything, that everyone in the family knew it, even if no one said it to my face. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when someone has made it clear they are not just making a legal argument anymore. Finch made a note. He looked at me. He said, quietly, that I was welcome to respond and that I could also choose to submit any documentation I had brought. I brought my folder to the table. Inside was a log. I had kept it without thinking of it that way. It was just something I did, the habit of someone whose professional life required precise record-keeping. Every phone call I had made to my grandmother, dated, with a brief note of what we talked about. There were 4 years of them. We had spoken on average 4 times a week. Sometimes more when she mentioned she wasn't sleeping well, or when there was something on her mind she wanted to talk through. There were the wire transfer records. I had sent money to her account on the 1st of every month for 3 years, not large amounts individually, $400 at a time, but consistent. I had started after she mentioned without complaining that the property tax had gone up and that she was adjusting her budget. I had not told her it was coming. I had just started sending it. She had never mentioned it in our calls, but her attorney had found the records and included a note about them in the estate file. There were 18 months of grocery delivery records. I had set up a recurring order to her address after she told me the drive to the store had started to feel longer than it used to. I had updated the order seasonally based on what she told me she was eating. The last order had delivered 4 days before she died. And then there was the letter. It was from my employer, the United States Social Security Administration, Office of Quality Review, where I had worked for 5 years as a federal program analyst conducting compliance evaluations across the Pacific Northwest region. It was not a flashy letter. It simply confirmed my position, my tenure, and my professional standing. Rourke looked at the transfer records for a long time. Finch read through everything with the focused attention of someone who is genuinely recalibrating. He paused at the call log. He sat it down. He looked at my aunt. He said without inflection that the documentation presented a picture of sustained, consistent contact and financial contribution that had not been part of the original characterization. My aunt said she hadn't known. Her voice was different now. Smaller. Finch said that wasn't the question in front of them. My aunt's attorney attempted to redirect. Contributions of time and physical presence had a value that remote support did not replicate, he said, and the emotional labor of being present could not be reduced to wire transfers. Finch agreed that was true. He also noted that the documented contributions I had made appeared to have been ongoing, intentional, and made without any apparent expectation of recognition, which in his experience was not the behavior pattern of someone disengaged from a relationship. My aunt said, sharply, that I had never told any of them I was doing any of this. I looked at her steadily. I said that she had never asked. She didn't respond immediately. She was looking at the call log. 412 entries over 4 years. The mediation ended with the will upheld. The house on Birchfield Lane remained mine. When Finch stepped out to prepare the summary documents, my aunt and I were left in the room with Rourke, who began organizing his files with the focused efficiency of a man who wants to indicate that his role here is concluded. My aunt didn't move. She asked me finally why I had never said anything. Not to her, not to anyone. I told her the truth. I hadn't done any of it to say anything. I had called my grandmother because I wanted to talk to her. I had sent money because she needed it and I had it. I had ordered groceries because it was a problem I could solve from where I was. There was no announcement to make because none of it had been done for an audience. She said that made her feel worse, not better. I told her I understood that. Then she said something I had not expected. She said that she had worked very hard to take care of a woman who talked about me every single week, and that over time it had become painful in a way she had not known how to handle, and that she thought some of what she had felt about me had been something closer to envy than she had ever admitted to herself. She said it plainly, looking at the table rather than at me, like someone reading a sentence they had just written and weren't sure they should have. I didn't know what to do with that kind of honesty. I still don't entirely. I told her that my grandmother had loved her, that I had heard about the Sunday dinners and the appointments and the way she had shown up every week, and that I had been grateful someone was there in the physical way I couldn't be. I told her I was sorry I had never said that before. She nodded. She didn't speak again before Rourke guided her toward the door. The following month I drove back to Charlotte and started the work of deciding what to do with the house. I wasn't ready to live in it and I wasn't ready to sell it. I hired a local company to maintain the garden through the spring, because the idea of those tomato beds going unattended felt like the wrong kind of ending. My aunt came by on a Saturday afternoon without calling first. She stood at the edge of the east garden and looked at it for a while. I brought out 2 cups of coffee and set one on the porch railing near where she was standing. She picked it up. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she started telling me the name of each variety my grandmother had planted and which ones produced best and which one had given her trouble the summer before last. I didn't know any of that. I listened to all of it. There is a specific kind of loss that doesn't announce itself cleanly. It accumulates in the space between people who care about the same person but don't know how to say it to each other. I think my grandmother understood that about us. I think she left me the house not as a verdict, but as a reason to return. Not to win anything. Just to finally be in the same place at the same time and see what happened when there was nothing left to avoid. I don't know yet what my aunt and I are to each other now. Something is different. The hostility has changed into something with less certainty in it. That feels to me like the beginning of something rather than the end of something else. My grandmother used to say that the people who love you quietly are often doing more than you'll ever know. I think she meant it as comfort. I think she also meant it as a question she was asking herself about her own life. I have been thinking about someone in your life you've written a story about. A version of them you settled on years ago and stopped updating. A sibling. A parent. A cousin. Someone you think you understand completely because you knew them once. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. When did you last let new information change the story you were already telling? I have thought a lot about what my aunt said in that mediation room, not the accusation itself, but the layer underneath it. That I had coasted. That I had been loved without earning it. I think she believed that completely when she said it, and I think the reason she believed it so completely was that she had never once asked me a question about my life in 6 years. That is not an indictment. It is just what happens when we decide we already know someone. We stop collecting new information. We keep updating the story we have with the same old facts. And eventually, the story calcifies into something we treat as truth. My grandmother Vera never did that. She asked me questions until the very end. Real ones. The kind that don't have a comfortable answer waiting in advance. She asked what I was afraid of. She asked whether I was being honest with the people around me. She asked once on a Tuesday evening call in March whether I was proud of the life I was building or just comfortable in it. I didn't have a good answer. She didn't push. She just let the question sit there between us, which was its own kind of wisdom. I think what I understand now, sitting with all of it, is that the things we do quietly accumulate in ways we can't always see. I sent money every month, not because I thought it would matter later. I called 4 times a week, not because I was building a record. I ordered groceries across 2 time zones because there was a problem I could solve and a person I loved, and those 2 things lined up. None of it was strategic. It was just what you do when someone matters to you and you are paying attention. The mediator, Howard Finch, said something after he reviewed the documents that I keep returning to. He said that the evidence suggested the contributions had been made without any apparent expectation of recognition. He said it neutrally, as an observation. But I heard something in it, that consistency without performance is its own kind of character. That you can't manufacture 4 years of phone logs, you can't backdate 3 years of wire transfers. The record existed because the relationship existed, not the other way around. My aunt showed up to the garden a month later. She didn't call first. She stood at the edge of those tomato beds and named every variety, and I realized she had been paying attention too, just to different things than I had. She knew the garden. I knew the phone calls. Between the two of us, we probably knew Vera better than either of us had known alone. I don't think effort guarantees outcome. I don't think being consistent means you will always be recognized for it in the moment. Sometimes the recognition comes years later, through a document a woman updated 14 months before she died, witnessed by 2 people who were not family. Sometimes it comes from a mediator reading a call log in a quiet office in Charlotte. Sometimes it just lives in you, unwitnessed, and that has to be enough. What I know is this: the life you build when no one is watching is still a life. The care you give when there is no audience is still care. And the people who love you are often keeping track in ways you would never think to ask about. Vera knew. She always knew. She just waited until she was certain before she said so.